Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March 21st meeting of the City of Tampa Historic Preservation Commission. We are here today to introduce our commissioners and our staff who are present with us today. So please introduce yourself and your position on the commission, beginning on my right.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Ortiz, and I'm a land use planner.
Good morning, Dominique Cobb, Vice Chair, Urban Planner.
Vivian Solaga, Preservation Architect, Chair.
Carrie Ann Canch, alternate.
Missy Shoecraft, Preservationist.
Has everyone received the minutes of the previous meeting via email, I believe? And are there any comments or corrections to those minutes?
None.
Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve minutes.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
And there are announcements I see in our packet. There are several kind of interesting events coming up.
Good morning, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Welcome to this morning's hearing. We do have a number of items on the agenda, but I did want to first begin with introducing and welcoming our newest staff member to our division, Heather Bonds, who's here in the audience with us this morning. And Heather comes to us from our sister agency in our department, from development coordination. So she's got some experience with the city, but her preservation experience extends far beyond that to critical roles in the city of Orlando as their historic preservation officer. So we welcome Heather. She's going to be a big part of our program and for this particular board moving forward, and I think it's going to really open up the capacity that we've been lacking to move some of our items forward in the upcoming months. In addition to that, I did want to just call to attention, there are some flyers in your packets. One of the roles that I serve under is an appointment to the Hillsborough County Historic Advisory Committee that actually considers applications and develops language for the historic markers throughout the city. And I wanted to pass some of these opportunities along to you as the liaison for the city with this particular program, and let you know about some of the plaque dedications and ceremonies that are coming up this month. There's actually a really interesting one on the 30th, which is a mural that's being dedicated in Ybor City, along with a historic marker. And then there's going to be a plaque that's celebrating the 1937 Anti-Fascist Women's March that occurred in Ybor City. So if you are available, please join us. I'll be there myself, and it's always a wonderful time seeing the community come together to celebrate our history. And with that, I will move on to the disclosure of conflicts of interest and ex parte communication with our legal counsel.
Good morning, Commissioners. Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Will the Commissioners please state whether or not they have any conflicts of interest regarding any of the items that are on the agenda?
None.
Thank you. Additionally, will the Commissioners please state whether or not they've had any ex parte communications regarding any of the items that are on the agenda?
None.
Thank you.
And with that, we are ready for the swear-in. So I believe it's just staff here today, or anyone in the audience that's going to be speaking. Please stand and raise your right hand for the swear-in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be giving today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. And this morning, we are very happy to have with us Brandy Miklas, who's the president of the Friends of Tampa Union Station, who's here to provide us with an update on what's going on at Tampa Union Station. It is one of the city's local landmark structures and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, a very special place in our city. And Brandy is going to kind of tell you a little bit about what's been going on with the Friends of Tampa Union Station and progress at the station itself. Brandy?
Well, good morning. Just as Dennis stated, my name is Brandy Miklas. I am the volunteer board member and president of Friends of Tampa Union Station, and I have three updates for you regarding Union Station. And there's no formal presentation today. I guess the most formal item is to show you item number one I was going to mention. Friends of Tampa Union Station received a historic preservation grant through Hillsborough County's competitive grant funding in 2020 to restore one of the original buildings that's not attached to the main station. It's just right behind it. It's a little over, it's about 3,200 square feet, and it's known as the Baggage Building. Right now, the Baggage Building, prior to its restoration, it did not have heating and air. It did not have fire protection. It needed electrical upgrades. It needed new upgrades to basically every component of the Baggage Building. And so we were able, due to the Hillsborough County Historic Preservation Grant, as well as donations from Friends of Tampa Union Station board members and other private donors, and we were able to restore the building. We had a ribbon cutting for it last November, and we, the Friends group, was recognized last month for the Downtown Partnerships Urban Excellence Awards. We were recognized for the Downtown Collaboration Award, and it was a great story of volunteers working to preserve the station. Friends of Tampa Union Station is the successor of the original Friends group. It was known as the Tampa Union Station Preservation, I should know what the R stands for, TUSPR was the acronym. Dennis has been that's what it is. Dennis is a longtime board member for Friends of Tampa Union Station as an ex officio board member. So we are just following in their footsteps and continuing, preserving the past to ensure the future. So that was number one. I wanted to mention that. Those accolades really mean a lot. So that was great to be recognized. And my second item is a design build for $2 million worth of restorations inside the station. So if you're not familiar, or if I can refresh your memory, Tampa Union Station was opened in 1912 and has had kind of a typical history. 1970s, 1980s kind of fell into disrepair. And after it was, of course, listed in the National Historic Landmark, or designated as a National Historic Landmark, the original nonprofit group worked together and did a full restoration of the station, and it was reopened in 1998. So we're now at the 25th anniversary of that reopening and that original restoration. However, more repairs and restoration are needed at this time, and so through funding of the from the downtown CRA, as well as some grant efforts that the Friends of Tampa Union Station board members have been pursuing through FRA and the state of Florida, we are moving forward. The city of Tampa is moving forward with that restoration work. The kickoff meeting for the restoration work occurred last Friday, March 17th, and the lead contractor is a company, the Collage Companies, and they are working with a local architect in town, McCants Architecture, and a few other vendors. And I believe, my understanding is the work will take approximately 12 months. And so they are already targeting May of 2024 for some sort of grand opening or just kind of an unveiling of the work. So I'll make sure to keep Dennis, and he'll stay as informed as, of course, in his role as Historic Preservation Manager for the city. But we would love to report back progress and provide some photos. Imagery is great. I apologize, I don't have a full deck with you for you today. And the final item is the Friends of Tampa Union Station. Prior to the pandemic, we had an annual event. It was always on the second Saturday in May, and it recognized basically the birthday of the station, which was May 15th, 1912, and it's called Tampa Train Day. So we haven't had this community event since 2019, and even though there's going to be work going on at the station, it'll be more of the design portion of this work. I don't think we'll be having to say excuse our dust at this point come May of this year, but we are going to have a Tampa Train Day event, recognize the 25th anniversary of the reopening and restoration of the station. It will be Saturday, May 13th. It starts at 10 a.m. The mayor will be joining us at the beginning, and it will have music and some food trucks and, of course, some amazing displays of historic preservation and train enthusiasts. So we definitely we welcome you to join, and again, that's Saturday, May 13th. So that's my update for Tampa Union Station. So, any questions? Or good? Okay.
What is the baggage building being used for now that it's been restored?
Well, I'm glad you asked. 'Cause I was a little tardy today because there's actually an event going on right now. The City of Tampa's Mobility Department is hosting a 2-day community charrette at the station regarding the Twigg Street corridor. So the Twigg Street corridor runs, east-west down. Is basically from Ashley Drive all the way to Channelside Drive. Is the full Twigg Street corridor. Tampa Union Station is located at the corner of Twiggs and Nebraska. Thought it would be a great location for the community charrette. And so that is just one example. Public meetings, USF School of Architecture and Community Design has hosted a poster session there on some students' plans for a Franklin Street revisioning. And there have also been a few just, again, community-related events. So it's 3,200 square feet. It is ready to, it's shining right now, but it's ready to be used as a meeting space and community event space.
Good. Exciting.
Yeah, please
It's
come
been,
by.
That building is so worthy of as much tender care as it can get.
I agree. We have photos available on the Friends of Tampa Union Station Facebook page, pretty active on other social media, Twitter, for instance, but I would say Facebook is probably the best. And then there's the simple website, tampaunionstation.com. So, all right.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. And good luck in all these new adventures coming up this year.
Thank you so much, Vivian. Yeah, I hope to see you all there.
Will the train station still be operating during this renovation process?
It will, so that it'll remain an active, my understanding is there's going to be minimal work that will require the Amtrak station agents to relocate the ticket office from the main building. They're going to be, the Collage Companies has a history of working on active train stations. And so the passengers there will be some disruption, but it's going to be a matter of days, not even weeks or months, is my understanding. And so the daily train that's northbound to New York and the daily train that's southbound to Miami will continue as scheduled.
Good. Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Miklas?
You were talking about train day, Saturday, May 13th. What time does that begin?
10 a.m.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll have to provide a formal invite so Dennis can share it around. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
filling us in. That was very nice.
Thank you all. Yeah, it's nice to see you all in person too. I sometimes see you, on the city's YouTube, because I'm a little bit of a dork and watch that. You don't have to be an enthusiast. So thank you both, or all of you, for your time.
just to tie this back together, I think we obviously recognize Tampa Union Station as being a very significant historic resource in the city. And I think as a city, we're very fortunate to still have, our principal rail terminal in its original use. A lot of train stations in other communities have been repurposed into, other different types of uses, but, we can still experience Tampa Union Station as it was meant to be. And part of our program in sort of the macro sense is to bring recognition and bring protection to historic properties, but it also takes a village to keep these buildings in a condition where they're still viable, where they still attract interest and investment. And like the Friends groups, those people that put in the time and put in the sweat equity are integral to historic preservation. So thank you to Brandy, and thank you to the Friends groups and all those grassroots groups that are out there that help us in our larger mission.
May I?
Yes, please.
I think I'm on.
It's on.
It's on? So, in the same vein, Dennis, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that recently I had the opportunity to drive by the Jackson Hotel and was stunned by the level of deterioration. I mean, it's really, one would say demolition by neglect at this point. And so I wonder if maybe at the next meeting, if you could give us an update as to the plans for that structure and where are we on it? I'm truly a little bit at a loss.
Sure. Just to maybe one footnote on it, I don't want to approach this as demolition by neglect, because it's certainly not that. But it is been a very challenging property, and there is work that's underway. I will be happy to kind of bring the update back to you at our May hearing, and perhaps have some other individuals kind of participate that can inform you about what's going on. A lot of people in the community have concerns and are working on this project daily to try to save it.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Commissioner. I was going to actually wade into new business. This has been on my mind for quite a few months, actually since August with Adobe-ville, and I know you're going to fill us in on that. What I keep seeing is that Black and African places in the city of Tampa is continuously being neglected. Every Sunday, I drive by the Jackson House because I drop my grandmother off to church to Mount Moriah. And I go live on Facebook every week to see that, and I'm gonna take my time saying this because I'm 37 years old and I've seen that place almost every week of my life. And I see that the city of Tampa takes time to preserve places like, preserve places like cemeteries that I don't see any Black cemeteries preserved. And that's another thing I'm gonna bring up in new business. My grandmother is buried in the cemetery on MLK and 22nd. And to know that the city sat and let that property be sold, and while the community reached out year after year, East Tampa, when I sat on the CRA board, we reached out to see what could we do to preserve that cemetery, preserve places in East Tampa that the Black community still navigates through, and the city of Tampa has continuously neglected it. And back to the Jackson House, every week when I go by there, I see police officers sitting out there, but I don't see cautionary tape. I don't see a placard that shows what the Black community bought in that area right next to that train station. Even in the train station, I don't see the Black porters that made sure that train station is continuously in use. It seems as though everything that Black hands has touched in the city of Tampa is going away. If we take a trip to Jackson House, more than likely there will be boards on the ground. You can't even walk by the windows because a piece might fall out. And we get updates on things in Ybor City. We get updates on new sidewalks. But for a commissioner have to come in here and ask for things that are already on our agenda. I was born in 1985, and when Dobyville was originally on this agenda, it was not taken care of. And now I'm here serving, and again, you're giving us an update, and Dobyville is still being forgotten. And I've been on this commission since 2018. I have looked, I have tried my best to intervene on things that concern my community, but today I am upset because of the things that affect me and my family. Things that affect my history in East Tampa is not being remembered. It's falling apart as we sit here. So I am making an ask from you, Mr. Dennis, because you just quoted this about 5 minutes ago. It takes a village to keep buildings preserved in Tampa. What are we gonna do as a commission and as a city of Tampa to keep the African-American community here? Because I'm happy when I go to grand openings and restorations, but we have 29th Street that is deplorable. I walked down there in 2021 in May, and I saw prostitution. I saw many vile things but this was once a thriving Black community. And historic preservation has not stepped foot over there. Thank you.
Well, I have, we do have discussion on East Tampa on the agenda for later, so we'll be providing some information then. As far as the Jackson House, as I said, we'll come back with an update. I'm not totally up to speed on some of the issues, but I do think that perhaps at our next meeting we can have Robin Nye with the city's art program come in and talk about Soul Walk, which is a celebration of the African-American heritage in the city that's being developed both as a visual and an interactive experience. That may be something that would interest the commission. I had planned on that as well. And we can, certainly as a group, we can continue to identify and to allocate staff time to recognizing all different parts of the city's history. And, we as a staff work with the community to try to identify which resources are important to the community, and then to provide protective ordinances on those particular properties. However, our focus with this commission is fairly narrow. Some of these conversations take a broader reach.
Understood, but if possible, like I stated in the November hearing, we need task force. If historic preservation can only do so much, what are we doing with our other times? We are able to make special call meetings. We are able to meet with other people in the community, and thank you for the East Tampa update. I can't wait to hear that. But in the meantime, we could do something. And if I need to make a list of all of the areas of neglect in the African-American communities, I can do that before the end of this meeting, and I can meet with you privately to give you that. But again, as I don't want to keep hearing what we can do. I want to hear what's being done in steps and time. Again, every day that we don't preserve a piece of history, I have to do it by storytelling. I have to take my children to these places where the building is gone, but again, there's nothing there to show. But I do thank you for your time.
Excuse me, Kamari Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. Commissioner Shoecraft, can you make your request in the form of a motion? Thank you.
I so move that we get an update on the Jackson House at the May meeting, if at all possible. If that gives you enough time, Dennis.
Sure.
I second the motion.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Dennis, can you clarify, please, the ownership of the Jackson House? In my recollection, the city does not own that building.
That's correct. There's a nonprofit organization, the Jackson House Foundation, that is the owner, and that essentially coordinates with various other groups that are interested in the preservation, working on a plan for preservation of the Jackson House. But the city is one of the supporting parties.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I have one more question. When do you establish your work plan for the year? And I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't remember.
The work plan has been something that we've been talking about quite a bit in the legal department because it's a little bit unclear about exactly when that gets established. We've been building it periodically. We have an item on the agenda today that we're going to request be added to it. But typically, those are looked at in October collectively.
Thank you.
Shall I move on to the next item?
Actually, I want to make sure my point is missing. Please, legal, if I need to make a motion, if you can walk me through that. As far as East Tampa and the cemetery on MLK and 22nd, I also spoke about that being historically preserved. With that building being, with that lot being sold and the city of Tampa making, I guess, concessions to work with the owner, what is it that historic preservation can do to make sure that piece of history is preserved before a developer does anything to disgrace that area?
Well, within the authority of this commission, local designation is the main tool for preservation that is applied to properties that are eligible. So, we would, once again, that could be an item that could be added to the work plan if you so deem that appropriate. And the city's staff, your staff, would begin to collect the information for you to consider that. I'm not as familiar with the current owner of the cemetery, but there are criteria within the code that, do engage the owner and does consider the owner's desire for the designation as part of the criteria.
Okay, well, I would like to make a motion that this commission looks into preserving the cemetery on MLK and 22nd Street. Yes.
Question, is this the Memorial Park Cemetery?
Yes, this is.
Okay, that's tied up in legal things, because I talked to the commission, the cemetery coordinator is her name. And there's some red tape with that.
So legal, would we be able to, can you advise, please?
Can we get a second so that we can open this for discussion?
I second that motion.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the legal department. You can make a motion and I could work with staff on following up. And reminder, we have to stay within the parameters of historic preservation.
Right.
And what the purview is of historic preservation. This matter is pending before the CRA. This has been discussed a lot with the CRA. And again, as Dennis explained, the city does not own this property. There are certain code provisions that apply to historic preservation for properties. So we could certainly discuss that separately and report back to the commission.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. I just might make a general comment. While we look at preservation properties throughout the city, it is clearly evident that many of the owners of those properties do not have the same heartfelt desire as we do to protect these properties. I think there is an educational process that needs to be had with a number of these owners. This last go-round that we went through with the downtown building is another evidence of the fact that developers are not in it for preservation, they are in it for location and their advantage. And until we can move many of these owners to become of like mind where preservation is concerned, and help them to understand that preservation does not mean losing money. Preservation is a truly economic driver in most communities, and And yet they seem to be very unaware of that fact, despite the myriad of studies that have been done over time. And it's a matter, I mean, we've seen it with the cigar factory owners. We see it with many single-family residential owners. They just don't seem to be able to embrace the value of preservation, and that's unfortunate, but it's unfortunately a reality that somehow the community outreach needs to be taken to be able to help them understand. The Downtown Partnership recently engaged a private consulting firm to do an evaluation of the Franklin Street properties in order to identify historic properties there and to begin to work with the owners there. And it is the hope, they received a grant to do this from the Hillsborough County Preservation Challenge Grant Program. And it is their hope to reapply so that they could broaden that reach throughout, at least their focus now is throughout the Central Business District area. But the Challenge Grant Program is available to any person except for a single-family residential. And the Jackson House, for example, would be clearly eligible for a Challenge Grant Program. My firm, 10 years ago, tried to work with the owners of that, but most of the grant opportunities within Florida and the city need to have matching. And they were unable to come up with the matching, and the matching doesn't have to be money all the time. It can be in-kind services, it can be donated items and donated time. It's just, I think, an educational process that as preservationists, we have been dealing with this for decades and probably will continue to do so because of the like-mindedness of some owners of properties is not on the same plane as we are. And that's too bad. End of that comment. But we've got some good news coming along in the rest of the agenda, at least in terms of getting updates on several areas within the city that we can work toward encouraging preservation as much as possible. And Dennis, please fill us in.
Sure. Moving on to item number 8, I wanted to provide you an update with your efforts to expand the Hyde Park Local Historic District. I know I had sent out an email, I believe, a few weeks ago, but wanted to make this more formal. See, we have the PowerPoint?
We do.
Okay.
We do. You
Yeah,
don't, but
there we
there you go.
Everybody has it. So as you recall, much of the last 2 years or so, we've been engaged in efforts to expand the Hyde Park Historic District to encompass a broader area to provide protection to areas that we had identified as being threatened or experiencing high levels of demolition. So just to refresh your memories, the original boundaries of the local historic district, which are indicated in red, were established by ordinance in 1988, created the local historic district for Hyde Park. Much of that is still in place, was still in place until January 5th in its original configuration. The blue line did indicate the National Register of Historic Places District, which was established 3 years earlier in 1985. In its original classification, The district contained 834 contributing buildings and 433 non-contributing buildings. We had 2 applications from the 2 neighborhood associations that compose that northwestern edge of the historic district. That would be the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. So those 2 areas saw the value of the existing historic district and the effectiveness of it in maintaining the historic character of the neighborhood and ensuring that infill construction was of a character that fit into the neighborhood very, very well, as been proven over the years in the existing district. They came, worked with staff initially. This was an area that had been historically inventoried a couple of times, so there was a strong amount of inventory information that we could rely upon, and it was more of an effort to update that information. Also, there's an existing set of design guidelines which are necessary in a local historic district, and those were able to be just expanded into the expansion area and not recreated. So in accordance with the section of the code that deals with local historic designation, that's 27256, the staff was acting through a number of the required steps for council to consider local designation, and although there's just 5 checkpoints on this, takes quite a while to go through. Beginning from when these 2 neighborhood associations made application. If you recall, there was a number of updates at the commission throughout this process, both informing you of the level of engagement and discussing boundaries that could potentially be applied into the area. That engagement does entail quite a bit of staff work, going out, meeting with property owners, conducting research, creating maps, creating legal descriptions, and creating the report that is considered throughout the process. It came back to the HPC actually twice for a recommendation. That recommendation was officially submitted for your August 30th meeting. And then it did go to the Planning Commission for a staff review. It was found to be consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan. And then it was scheduled for 2 public hearings. Those public hearings at City Council were scheduled to December 8th, and then a second reading of the ordinance on January 5th. And so all these hearings, every public meeting was very well attended. I do appreciate, everyone within the expansion area and within the neighborhood associations that took time to come and participate in the process. As I said, it really takes a community effort to make these initiatives successful, and these neighborhoods were really engaged throughout. So the study area was generally the north part of the district that was outside of the local district, but within the national district. There was some fairly early observations that the area north of the crosstown had been, significantly compromised and most likely would, not qualify as a local district today. But the area south of the crosstown became an early focus for the staff in considering boundary options. Historically, this area, if you recall, also predated the presence of the Selman Crosstown Expressway. So it was, more from a planning perspective, a more unified area between the north and south ends and both the east and west as you move further to the south. The local districts and national districts superimposed here over the Sanborn map from 1929 along with the green box indicating the Dobyville area. These were all areas that were studied and contemplated in the development of a boundary line. Integral to, that discussion always is sort of the feasibility of being able to actually be successful in establishing the local district in these areas and the desires of the community and the residents that live there. The Dobyville area, a very prominent part of this expansion area, still contains the Richard Doby House, and much of that history is memorialized in a marker that's there off of Willow. And there was a great deal of support. Even some members of the Doby family attended the hearings to provide support for the expansion and protection of these areas. So we had discussed throughout the development of this initiative the various areas or segments of the expansion area. Originally, the Neighborhood Association requested expansion all the way to the crosstown. There was a later amendment by the applicants to consider Platt Street as the northern boundary. When it came to the Historic Preservation Commission in August, the commission recommended that that the northern boundary be situated just south of the crosstown. And that's the recommendation that we did move forward to City Council. So the data, just to refresh your memory, we had about a 66% contributing inventory in the pre-expansion district, which is a relatively high percentage for a local historic district of this nature, totaling nearly 1,300 buildings. Through the expansion, we were able to add 84 contributing and 100 non-contributing buildings into the inventory. That in itself, if it were a separate district, would still meet the criteria, but would be on the lower end of the threshold. But combined with the existing inventory, it still leaves you at a 63% contributing status with now 1,451 total buildings. So we did, I think, establish representation of some architectural styles that really weren't represented in the original inventory, as well as expanding the story of Hyde Park and the different layers of the story that really wasn't as, I think, adequately represented prior to the expansion. So in the staff's recommendation, we had been very consistent with what the original recommendation in 1988 was, as far as eligibility within the code. These closely resemble the criteria for the National Register of Historic Places. So the area was identified as being associated with significant events as one of the original neighborhoods that was established for the city of Tampa, and all the different events that tied in with the early development of the city. Associated with significant persons, those being some of the pioneer families that came to Hyde Park to establish it as a community, in addition to those in Dobyville that called that area their home. And then the third was the distinctive characteristics and architectural value of the area, which I think we all have experienced before in the Hyde Park neighborhood. So City Council did agree with us on those criteria. However, they did modify, at the applicant's request, the boundary to the center line of Platt Street, which they had the ability to do during their hearing process. So following your recommendation on August 30th and the Planning Commission's determination of consistency that followed, City Council unanimously adopted Ordinance 2023-16 on January 5th, thereby expanding the boundaries of the Hyde Park Local Historic District. And that concludes my update, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
I do, and can Can you go back to the PowerPoint slide that shows the percentage of contributing structures north of Platt Street? Okay, there it is, 57%, which is higher than any of the other districts. And yet the city council decided to eliminate that, right, as part of the movement of the boundaries. So this is going to dovetail to your comments, which is that there is a process of education of the property owners, but I think more significantly, there needs to be a process of education of the city council members. I, from my professional career, was a historic preservation in Arlington County, Virginia, and also was on the ARC board for the city of Alexandria, Virginia, for many years. And so in both of those communities, the commissioners and the city council members were very, very strong in support of historic preservation. So it's a somewhat of an open secret that if you can get through the historic board, if you get a denial, you can take it up to city council, and then it becomes a political matter, which it should be. That is, in fact, the way the process works, the due process works. But I feel very strongly that part of the reason why so many things either don't move forward or are compromised is because the city council, some of the members perhaps, not all, are not strong preservationists. And I think that's something that we need to take into account in terms of when you talk about educating. Because this is a stunning example. 57% of it was contributing, which is the highest percentage of that whole area. And yet, for reasons, you know, they have their reasons, obviously, they eliminated that. And I, as a preservationist, just
Well,
truly don't understand that.
Unfortunately, they eliminated it at the behest of many of the property owners in that area who themselves perhaps do not understand the benefit that can be had by allowing your structure. I mean, it doesn't protect just their building, but it protects every building in that district. And, you know, I know when we were going through our hearings with this expansion, many of those owners were here in these chambers extolling the unvaluable virtues of what they believed to be unvaluable virtues of preservation, and they were stubborn. They were not to be moved, unfortunately. And that, I think, was the only reason that the council waffled on that particular segment of the properties, because those owners and several particular ones who were more outspoken than others were very adamant at those public hearings and I'm sure privately.
And, excuse me, that's not an unusual circumstance.
No.
But if you have a council that's made up of people that support preservation, they can very easily say exactly what this diagram says, which is 57% of that area is contributing, but they didn't.
Just to clarify, I was obviously present at both the hearings and listened to the discussion. There was quite a bit of discussion on this area north of Platt and south of the crosstown. But ultimately, I think what City Council was reacting to was the request of the applicants, because the applicants did, at the initial part of the hearing, request that the boundary be modified, that their application be modified to the center line of Platt. And so there was a lot of discussion on that, but at the end, the neighborhood association had made the request, and so City Council honored the wishes of the neighborhood association.
We understand how it works. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dennis regarding the Hyde Park expansion? Thank you. That was very, these graphs that you present in these updates are extremely enlightening and very, very helpful.
And following all this work, the effort continues internally with the city. We had a lot of sort of post-celebration work to do in making sure that the properties within the area are then added into all the systems that we have to ensure that when building permits are requested, that they're diverted to the Architecture Review staff so that they can be processed through the Architecture Review Commission. There's documentation, site files, and mapping that has to occur. A lot of outreach. We sent a letter out to the entire neighborhood, letting them know that the district had been established and providing them contact information. We reflected that on our website as well, and that effort continues. There's still a lot of education as this area sort of transitions into the larger district. So I appreciate both my staff's effort has been quite a challenge, but also our other sister agencies that assist us in making these things happen. It's a group effort.
Are these update PowerPoints made available on the preservation website?
This particular one is not. We do, of course, everything that we televise here is available on YouTube through the city's television station. But we do have a lot of links on the website that takes you to this information, the designation report and all the background.
Great.
So if it's the pleasure of the board, we'll move on to item number 9, which is a discussion on Port Tampa. And I'm going to ask Elaine to come up and lead the discussion on that particular area.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation staff. Just bear with me a moment while I get this presentation set up. It has been a few years since we've talked about Port Tampa. We brought it, I believe, sorry, there we go. Brought it before the commission in 2020 last, right before the pandemic began. And I'm very excited to be back here today to talk about it with you once more and to sort of get some, hopefully, interest in this area moving along again. Port Tampa City is at the southwest end of the South Tampa Peninsula. It was a separate city from 1893 until 1961. This 1882 map of Hillsborough County, which at that time included what is now Pinellas County, shows you the location of where the city of Tampa was at that time and the location of Port Tampa. At that point in time, Port Tampa, the area that was to become Port Tampa, was known as Black Point. Large areas of the South Tampa Peninsula were owned by various railroad companies, and eventually the land and the charter to bring the railroad to Tampa were purchased by Henry B. Plant. This is the aerial of present-day Hillsborough County, and showing you that sort of the same locations, so you can get sort of a sense of scale for how Tampa and Hillsborough County and Port Tampa all relate. This is showing you the some of the annexations. I believe that's let's see, we've got the sort of, I'm trying to just determine what the colors look like on your screens there. The overlaid colors there, the large sort of pinkish purplish area shows the area that was annexed into the city in the 1950s, and then in 1961 the greenish area that included the city of Port Tampa and MacDill Air Force Base was annexed into the city of Tampa. And that just shows the area a little more closely. You can see the green lines that outline where the Port Tampa City's boundaries were. So, in about 10 years prior to this plat, Plant had begun to bring his railroad to Tampa, and regular service began between Tampa and Plant City in 1883, and by 1884 the railroad was connected to Kissimmee, which thereby connected Plant's service to Tampa and the rest of his extensive railway system, I believe as far north as Savannah. In 1887, Plant managed to build his railroad bridge over the Hillsborough River and extend it all the way down to Black Point, where there was a natural channel less than a mile offshore. This channel was deep enough so that Plant was able to build a mile of piers, docks, and wharves into the bay, and thereby establish Port Tampa. This was the first area where there was really enough depth for full ships to be able to come up to the pier. Previously, ships would have to come up to Ballast Point, unload their ballast, and then transfer their cargo into smaller ships to be able to get into Hillsborough Bay and up to the city of Tampa. But at Port Tampa, ships were now able to berth alongside the rail lines of the pier, allowing for the direct transfer of cargo and passengers between ships and rail cars. Plant built employee housing, known as the Plant Quarters, and harbor pilots and ship captains began to build their homes nearby. Plant's newest steamships, the Mascot and the Olivet, were beginning regular routes to Key West and Cuba, delivering mail, tobacco, and passengers. In 1888, the U.S. Congress decided it was a better use of its money to improve the natural channel at the entrance of Old Tampa Bay, thereby Port Tampa, rather than to dredge the entire distance of Tampa Bay to the Hillsborough River. So with the new port in the area, some members of Plant's investment team, C.W. Prescott and Captain James Fitzgerald, acquired most of the land east of the rail line to over to Wall Street, which is on the east end of the Platte here, and filed the plat of Port Tampa City with Hillsborough County Clerk in 1892. And here's the 1904 coast chart of Tampa Bay. You can see where Tampa, West Tampa, Fort Brooke, Hyde Park, Ybor City, you can see how they were all sort of nestled close together along the Hillsborough River, and then there's Port Tampa City, 8 miles away down the peninsula. Plant began shipping phosphate out of its port. Here you can sort of see the early growth that was covered by the Sanborn maps in Port Tampa. And note that the two main areas were sort of the south side of Port Tampa City and the north side of Port Tampa City. These photos show the plant system. You can see the some of the brochures and the advertisements that went along with Plant's system of railway and steamship lines. He provided sleeping cars so that passengers could get to their destinations comfortably. The Tampa Bay Hotel, which opened in 1891, was one of the magnificent destination hotels along his lines. And then the inn at Port Tampa was also developed to allow passengers to have a place to stay when they were traveling between Tampa and Cuba. And that is the inn in the center picture, located right off the pier there. Kind of an interesting arrangement. So the the Port Tampa City Charter was granted in 1893, and Plant City grew and established its municipal services. But in the meantime, Cuba continued its fight against Spain for independence, which it had been doing since the mid-19th century. Tensions mounted in the U.S. following the sinking of the USS Maine in the Havana Harbor. And Henry Plant wrote to the Secretary of War, Russell Alger, calling attention to the substantial improvements he'd made in Port Tampa, and suggested that they make Port Tampa the point of departure for the supplies and troops going to Cuba in the event of war. Thousands of soldiers began to arrive in Port Tampa, and the U.S. prepared to send troops to battle in Cuba. Soldiers were stationed not only in Port Tampa, but also in West Tampa, Tampa Heights, Ybor City, and even Lakeland, where they awaited embarkation. And I'm actually going to roll back on this slide a little bit and show you that map there. Yeah, you can see the different areas where they were located. And we have pictures of some of the Cuban soldiers who were living in Tampa at that time, going through drills. And then, of course, also the famed Rough Riders practicing in the Bay. So the little city's economy and population boomed. Several churches were established. And it was a comfort to many of the young enlisted men who were away from home for the first time to have the several churches in the area. And as the Spanish-American War was fairly brief. And after it was over, by 1899, Port Tampa City did continue to thrive. When Henry Plant died in 1899 as well, his rail system was sold to the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. Development in Port Tampa City was somewhat hindered following the Spanish-American War, but the ACL did continue to lease space to major oil companies as well as the phosphate companies, and those have continued to be the primary commodities shipped in and out of Tampa. There we go. Some of the development that continued in Port Tampa City included its commercial district. There was a large fire in 1908 that destroyed much of the commercial area, but it did spare the Brick Corner and the Fitzgerald Building, which are two of the well-known historic structures in Port Tampa today. However, neither of those have any sort of historic designation. The Tofoletti brothers were well known as a dry goods purveyor, and the Destination Pier and Beach were popular as well. In 1921, there was a hurricane which thankfully spared much of the residential portion of Port Tampa City. However, it was a good indicator of the tragedy that could occur should a more significant hurricane ever approach Port Tampa. In the coming years in World War I, a lot of the money that could have been invested in Port Tampa was actually diverted to the Ybor Channel for its development. A lot of the shipping industry became larger around the Ybor Channel, and it was also used as an area where several battleships were constructed. So the Ybor Channel continued to grow, and eventually the main port for Tampa became what we know of today as the Tampa port. And Port Tampa just remained as a shipping area, but was primarily limited to, again, the phosphate and oil industries. In 1939, MacDill Air Force Base opened, and the Port Tampa City and its economy again experienced a little period of growth. Following the war, Port Tampa City continued as a small municipality. You can see on the right side of your screen, the world's largest electric sign in 1953 was dedicated, advertising the industrial area of Port Tampa City. In about mid-century, the plant railroad terminals were demolished, which allowed larger ships to approach, but now we no longer have that resource. And then in 1961, again, the Port Tampa was annexed into the city of Tampa, and the Port Tampa City Charter was abolished. When we're looking at the Port Tampa City, there are significant historic structures. We see a variation. There are a few commercial buildings left. Most of the historic structures in the area are residential. When we were considering reasons for their potential areas of significance, we would consider that they might be significant under criterion A in the areas of community planning for the city of Port Tampa, and the areas of maritime history, industry, military, or transportation. There are reasons to designate buildings in Port Tampa City and under criterion B under ethnic heritage for their association with the lives of persons significant in Port Tampa City's past, and also under criterion C in architecture and engineering. Some of the buildings that are historically recognized in Port Tampa include the Old St. Mark Community Aid Center, which was designated as a local historic landmark by the city of Tampa in 2018. And it's representative of the early church architecture in Port Tampa, and it's associated with the African American history of Port Tampa. This building was constructed in 1892 by the First Advent Christian Church, and it was relocated in the early 1900s after being donated by the Adventists to the Black community of Port Tampa. It was also, and it was moved from either Mascot Street or O'Brien Street, and it's a little unclear, by a team of mules to its location on Sherrill Street now, where it was in use by the congregation of St. Mark Missionary Baptists. It's now sort of an annex to the church as their new sanctuary is across the street. The Commercial Bank building was designated as a local historic landmark by the city of Tampa in 1994. It was constructed in 1926 for the Bank of Port Tampa in the neoclassical style. And it has served other purposes throughout the years, but it is now home to the Port Tampa City branch of our public library system. Among the residential structures in Port Tampa is the Johnson Wolf House, which was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. It was constructed in 1883 and altered a little bit in 1893. But has maintained its historic integrity, and it's associated with Captain Henry L. Johnson, who was a ship pilot who worked for the plant system. There have been a few prior surveys of historic structures in Port Tampa City area. They began in 1973, and the early surveys were limited to the most significant sites. The most recent survey of the Port Tampa area was in the early 2000s, and altogether 144 structures were identified through these surveys. These surveys determined that there was not enough density of historic structures to form a district, but they recommended that individual structures could be eligible for listing in the National Register or for local recognition and designation. Over the years, of course, there have been demolitions and losses of these 144 structures. We're currently working on getting a current count of what's remaining. There's also been a significant amount of infill and new subdivision development in the area. So this here is the 1948 aerial. And then you can see the change in growth through 1922, and then we have some photos of some of the new development. This is on the south end of Port Tampa. So if we consider one of the potential ways to recognize historic properties is through a multiple property designation. The city currently has 5 multiple property designations, including Beach Park, which is a neighborhood that has that was built with certain styles of buildings, Spanish style or Mediterranean revival style buildings. We have 10 structures in that neighborhood that are included in the multiple property listing. The historic bridges on the Hillsborough River is another thematic group that includes the 6 bridges along the Hillsborough River that were built from 1913 through the 1950s. And the historic Central Avenue area and African American heritage sites currently includes 5 structures, and that recognizes the area, primarily the buildings in the area along Central Avenue, which was historically a significant commercial area for the African American community. North Franklin Street in downtown has several buildings that are included in its multiple property designation, about 12, sort of the primary commercial downtown corridor in Tampa. And then the West Tampa, within the West Tampa Historic District, which is just only a nationally listed historic district, there are 5 individual structures that we have recognized under a multiple property designation. A multiple property designation recognizes buildings that are individually significant enough to be listed as landmarks, but they do have a common theme, so it's sort of a thematic approach to doing a district when there's not a significant enough concentration for there to be an actual geographically definable area for a district. So what we're looking for today is some direction from the board. If you concur with staff that this is a area that's worth our energy and would like to direct us to continue to work with Port Tampa, the former Port Tampa City area, we would coordinate with the Port Tampa Civic Association, do some outreach to property owners, and then bring back our findings to you at a future date. So with that, Liz.
Thank you, Elaine. That was really an interesting walk back through time. Just many of us are unaware of a lot of the histories that brought these properties to us in the first place.
So to provide you a little bit of context, these, very similar to how Hyde Park, manifested itself. This is similar to that in the original, elements of it. We've been getting some calls from the area over the last year or so, expressing concern about some of the redevelopment in the area and how that may threaten historic buildings. The staff, myself and Elaine have been out to the area over the years and really didn't identify, a overall will to try to get a district done. I think there's been some surveying done in the area, which is really a prerequisite of being able to even to consider a district. We don't feel that there's an assembly of buildings that would support a district, but a multiple properties designation is something that we usually approach more voluntarily with property owners initially to see if we have an interest in some of these very significant early houses, electing into a multiple properties designation. And then we had one fairly prominent house on Inner Bay get demolished. A factor of the period of development of this neighborhood was that you have fairly substantial houses that occupy multiple parcels. Mm-hmm. And that's a very attractive element in today's development approach. So we've had a couple, what I'll call near misses on some of the buildings. Unfortunately, the one last year, we couldn't really take any steps to try to protect it. We got there a little too late to that one. So at that time, I did speak with the neighborhood association, and we talked about, what options were out there. At the time, we were heavily engaged in Hyde Park. Our resources were not as bolstered now that we have another staff person as well. So we think it's an opportune time to try to reach out to that area. It's the time is now. It's redeveloping. I think you see how dramatic that aerial is. There's a lot of substantial redevelopment. And once the vacant parcels or the tremendously underutilized parcels are not readily available financially, then usually the larger historic structures are sort of targeted for redevelopment.
I have just a quick question. I understand the difficulty of having a cohesive district, given the scarcity of the available buildings, for the reasons you just discussed. Has there been any consideration of doing a cultural landscape survey of the area? Because physically, for example, we still have the train tracks, and there's large industrial components to this area that could be not necessarily protected, but certainly highlighted in some way. When the building resources are gone or scarce, that's another way of interpreting the history or daylighting the history of the area. And there've certainly been many, many significant cultural landscape surveys done all over the country in areas like this, where the original structures are mostly gone, but you can still tell a very cohesive story. I mean, from the perspective of the city of Tampa, this is an area very rich in cultural history, and that could be a way to highlight it if at all possible.
I think that's certainly, an option that we have as we get into this. It's sort of, I think wide open as far as how we approach it. We just had a conversation yesterday about just the importance of, the docks, and although, there's not any of the original structures remaining, that, there's most likely some, obviously cultural, but also archaeological value that would exist there. So it's a little, I think, different than some of our more suburban and urban types of districts that we deal in currently, but it would take, I think, a different approach. And I think something educationally would be very valuable. We could certainly partner with some of our community partners on sort of highlighting the importance of that particular area to the development of Tampa as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the oil, the phosphate, it's got the connection to Cuba, certainly the agriculture, the maritime. I mean, there's a lot of different layers here that you don't necessarily find in other places in Tampa, which is why I find it so interesting as a resource for the city.
Dennis, when areas are aggregated to be multiple properties listings, what protection, if that's possibly the correct word, is given to development of adjacent properties? I mean, if someone's got a designated landmark, is there anything that can be overseen if someone adjacent to that property is seeking some sort of a development?
I think that's somewhat situational. It depends on sort of the intensity of the development that would be adjacent and how that may adversely impact the historic resource. But it's a much lesser level of regulation that would exist in a historic district for properties that, are not identified historically. In a historic district, contributing properties obviously are your historic properties, but non-contributing properties also have to meet design standards because the area as a whole can experience adverse effect, whereas on a multiple property designation, which is a grouping of landmark structures, it's just that particular landmark that would maybe experience a adverse effect. So, if there's a rezoning or something like that that's going to really trigger, you know, a significant change or potentially structural issues, then we do get involved with those, but generally adjacent properties aren't regulated in a multiple property listing.
Commissioners, are there any other questions regarding this area and this presentation? You look like you have a question. No? No? Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Again, we really, and Elaine, it's just pretty amazing when we look at the vast amount of resources that we do have, that we can't move forward a little bit more quickly with helping to protect these.
Yeah, and maybe just a comment here, but one of the things that I think is difficult for the city of Tampa is we're such a large city with so many unique areas and one historic preservation division. So we end up finding ourselves kind of picking and choosing which areas to focus on. And I think that that has a lot to do with the interest of the residents in that area, and from a historic preservation point of view, that can make things a little bit difficult. So just an observation.
So I think if there's a consensus that the staff should allocate time, we'd want to just have a motion to add this to our work program so that the staff can plan that accordingly in the current and upcoming year.
Excellent. Are we for a quorum?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, I have one more question.
Okay.
I have a question, Dennis. What's the association we're in conjunction with? You said a name for the city of Port, yeah. The Port Tampa City.
It's the Port Tampa City Civic Association, I believe.
Okay, yeah, Civic Association. Okay, thank you.
So we'll work with the city's Division of Neighborhood Engagement and identifying the registered neighborhood association for any area that we're working in. That's how we approach it.
May I have a motion for the staff to add the multiple properties listings in the Port Tampa to the work plan?
Okay, I guess I have a question. If we are to add Port Tampa to the work plan, does that mean we cannot add East Tampa?
Others?
Or others, not to, be so specific, but,
No, I don't believe that's correct. I mean, there's several things that are running simultaneously on the work plan. We have, every one of those multiple property designations that we reviewed, those are on the work plan. We've got, in May, we already have 4 properties that are coming forward for designation. So we're kind of working these things at different development areas. And this particular area in Port Tampa has a lot of existing research and surveys on it. So it's somewhat, further along. Whereas there might be an area that there hasn't been that initial inventorying and research that is sort of a different type of staff work.
okay.
Yeah, I can make a motion. So I make a motion to add number, is it 9? Yeah. 9 on the agenda, the city, Port Tampa City, to the work plan. Is that complete motion?
Kamari Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Are you asking for staff to add to the workflow the potential multiple properties listing in the Port Tampa to their workflow?
Yes. So say that. So I make a motion for the staff to add the multiple potential property listing for Port Tampa to the work plan. Yes.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And we've got another neighborhood area coming up here under item number 10 of the agenda for East Tampa Historic Resources.
Once again, Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. I'm going to go to the Elmo. Just to put up a reference of the map. During our last public hearing, there was discussion on studying East Tampa and what potential historic resources might be able to be recognized and preserved within this area. This is a map of the physical boundaries of East Tampa. It's a very large area, essentially composed of Interstate 275 as a boundary on the west, Interstate 4 as it wraps around towards the east, 56th Street kind of being the further eastern element of it, and then jogging back up to Lilac. And then the area north of Hillsborough Avenue, you see as it kind of jogs along that particular area. Just north of this, just for reference, is the National Register District of Hampton Terrace in this area. And then as we go to the northeast, it kind of transcends into Seminole Heights and Seminole Heights area. So in the time since we've met, we have tried to identify what existing historic inventories, cultural resources inventories may have been done in the area. What we've identified is pretty minimal. There's a small segment just in this southwestern part of East Tampa that is considered to be part of the landmark district for Ybor City. So that's going to go up to essentially 21st Avenue, which is right about here, and then extend back down to around 15th Street. That was inventoried as part of the original National Landmark District, and then there was a later sort of update when the Ybor City National or local historic district was expanded in 2013. So that's, I would say just about maybe 10% of the overall area. There's some inventorying that occurred along Hillsborough Avenue, both for the Hampton Terrace National Register District and for some activity occurring along 275 with the interstate expansion with the cultural resources surveys were done in that area. Other than that, there has not been a lot of inventorying being done in there, which kind of leads us to a situation where we really don't know the exact composition of the historically eligible properties in the area. This is not an unusual situation. We sometimes run into this. Typically, the approach is then to engage the community and have the community assist us in identifying which resources they feel are appropriate for preservation, formalized preservation, or for nomination to the National Register of Historic Places, or perhaps commemoration through some sort of historic marker. So with that in mind, I did reach out to Cedric McCrae, who is the manager for the community redevelopment area in East Tampa, and we had a discussion about both what the conversation was at the Historic Preservation Commission and some of the conversations that are occurring within his CRA group and members of the public as well who compose those groups. And he thought it would be a good approach to perhaps meet with one of the subcommittees that deals with some of the issues that we're talking about. I believe they're called the Aesthetics and Beautification Subcommittee. And so he has added me to their agenda on May 9th, at which time I'll go ahead and let that committee know what our commission has requested and try to formulate a structure by which we can engage the public and get some feedback about what properties or what areas or what events deserve recognition and the best way to really approach recognition and designation of those resources. So coming back on, that meeting's on May 9th. Our next meeting's on May 16th. That's a pretty quick turnaround, but I would just recommend that I provide an update to you at that time, that, you know, of what happened at the meeting and of next steps. But that is the information I have for you today. Of course, we had a conversation earlier, so we can follow up on that additional information for any questions that you may have. And I believe there's someone in the public who would like to comment on this discussion as well.
Absolutely. Would you please state your name and address for the record?
Good morning. My name is Noreen Copeland Miller, and I live in East Tampa. I am on the CAC with the East Tampa Partnership, part of the CRA group. I am one of the council members. And I want to thank you all for the opportunity to allow me to come up and speak. And certainly it was interesting listening to Mr. Fernandez doing his presentation. From time to time, I do look at this board meeting at times. And to say the least, this morning was quite interesting for me. And I think you said it best when you said a walk back through time. And it's amazing how much Tampa has changed since I grew up here, because I attended Doverville Elementary School from 1st grade to 6th grade. And I remember, and I want to just share this briefly with you all, walking down Rome, the Grand Central, when President Kennedy was in Tampa. And we walked, our 6th grade class walked down Rome to Grand Central, which is now Kennedy Boulevard, to wave at the president. To say the least, I was really, it was interesting when they were talking about Doverville in that community, because I live there. But it's certainly, from listening to the history, I have to do much better. And I think that as we retire and do different things, a lot of times we step back and things do change. But one of the reasons I'm here today is because I do live in East Tampa, and I was hoping to hear an update about the East Tampa community, and certainly about the cemetery, the historical cemetery in East Tampa that we, over the years, got the wrought iron fence put in the front from the CRA perspective, and some signage, what we never had, and I think that only happened like in 2017, just getting signage and getting a fence part of the cemetery. And we have, from the CRA perspective, requested years ago to put up a wrought iron fence on MLK side and a fence on 26th side. And I think at that time, it was another manager there with the CRA. But they tabled it each time when we tried to do something with slum, blight, and infrastructure. And we were looking at that wrought iron fence as being infrastructure before the cemetery owner died. We wanted to do that, but we were not allowed to do it. I just want to say thank you all for your report about East Tampa, and hoping that this HPC will find a way to make sure that that cemetery is a historical site. And I stand here today, some folks could not make it from the Cemetery Society, but that founder and some of those members are quite interested in doing whatever we can to work to get it where it needs to be, the historical site that it is. So I do thank you all for allowing me to come up. Thank you for this enlightening walk back through history this morning for the Black community, for me, because it certainly was enlightening. And it was certainly a walk back through history. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So at that, I do not believe that we need to make a motion relative to your participation in this committee, and then the comments or the report that you will bring back. That's just a matter of staff. Is that correct?
I mean, I think at this point, you know, it's early in the discussion, but I have an understanding of, you know, what the end goal is. And I'll work to try to have that, you know, appropriately fit into what our role is for this particular commission. I think there may be some other programs that kind of tie in with this, and I think when I go to the community on May 9th and kind of initiate that, I'll be able to better identify, you know, the particular players that should be involved in this conversation.
Excellent. We'll look forward to hearing that.
Are we open for discussion?
Yes, we're open for discussion.
Did you want to go? I know you.
Oh, yeah, there's just something I mean, I'm kind of thinking about here, Dennis, and I don't want to tell you what you already know, but I think that maybe when you meet with the CRA, one of the things that should be brought up is the economic impact of historic designation. I mean, I think that sort of gets missed a lot, and that's one of the big roadblocks to participation in the historic designation program.
Thank you.
But I
Yeah.
know you know that
Yeah,
already.
well, definitely.
Hi, Dennis. Thank you again for following up on the acts in November to work with East Tampa. I actually thought you would bring back a bit more information, at least with the history of East Tampa instead of just a map. Even then, I asked if we can have task force beforehand and conversations about this. Yes, May 9th it is great to meet with the A&B committee, but is there any other resources available from historic preservation to get the community involved? The reason why I say that is because East Tampa, this is a working community where that A&B committee meeting may take place at 4 o'clock during the daytime when most of East Tampa is at work or in transition of going home. I personally do not think that is a good time and place because they're going to have that at the district police precinct where already in East Tampa there is a feeling about people coming to the precinct. So I would ask if you can bring that meeting outside of where they locally meet and possibly put it either at where they meet at Reagan Park, or use this chambers for that meeting, because again, in each community, we have different challenges. And with me living and working in East Tampa, having meetings during that time, we've always had an issue with it. And even with voting, the turnout is not as promising because we have a lot of factors that play into it. So from the historic preservation side, I would ask if we can bring some resources to where we can get a bit more participation, maybe even work with the City of Tampa Communications to get people to come to those meetings. Because if we've noticed, in East Tampa, we have meetings on the spur, and a lot of the community is not available. It's going on right now with Middleton High School. When we have meetings there during the week, we don't get a lot of turnout. So again, if we can get some type of liaison with the City of Tampa, maybe get some more signs out, or maybe some billboard coverage, because what we need to do is make sure all the people who have, the stakeholders are there. Most of our stakeholders, it's a transit community. Our stakeholders are at work. So again, I give my resources or my knowledge to help you with that. But May 9th, I would love to see more people show up, because again, this is history that is continuously being forgotten by the City of Tampa, and I don't want this to be another missed opportunity. Thank you.
It may be possible, and I know you're not in charge of the committee, but the public library that is over there has a beautiful facility that is open into the evenings where meetings such as this could take place. So perhaps you could put a little bug in somebody's ear that the location they've selected is probably not the best place to have such a meeting.
So,
in order to encourage people to attend.
Yeah, I want to say that, you know, I think this is an initial meeting, and it would help us to identify perhaps the best way to kind of move to the next step, which would be what I consider to be a, more structured community engagement. I do think that we need to somewhat, start off gradually on this. I think May 9th, I can certainly talk time and place with the CRA manager about it, but I'm apprehensive to do some sort of mass mail out because I haven't identified yet what we're really trying to achieve here. And so I think I need to have an understanding of the goals of what properties that may involve, or what areas, what particular segment of the heritage, and what our capacity is to be able to really be successful at that. I mean, you saw with, Hyde Park, took a couple years to navigate that. I would hope that this would be less because we're not necessarily dealing with such necessarily the same composition of neighborhood. But it is a large area. There will be a lot of, participation. I'm happy to, once we have identified sort of the approach that we want to implement, then to kind of begin to have formal meetings, and we can do that through the HPC, and we have a structure for that. But I think initially, talking to Mr. McCray and having him have an understanding of exactly what our goals are for this particular meeting is an important first step. I don't want to cause a lot of disruption in the area by people speculating what we might be out there doing until we have that defined.
So, Mr. Fernandez, I want to make sure I have a clear understanding. What is it that you're actually going to East Tampa to do? Because I know what I requested back in November, but what are you going to do May 9th?
I'm going to be addressing the subcommittee to see if there's an interest for them to become sort of the conduit by which we conduct outreach and identify potentially historic resources to be designated or commemorated.
Right, and again, I served on the CRA board back in 2020 and 2021 when we initially asked you. So again, we already established what we wanted when we asked for it in 2020 when I was on the CRA board. So again, making sure I'm clear, on May 9th, you're coming back again to ask us again what we want. Because
I'm not following your 2020 reference. What was?
That was for the CRA?
While in the CRA meeting, the board asked for the historic preservation to come in and do analysis on historic sites and to give an overview of what could be done.
Was that with a different agency?
No, that was with Mr. Fernandez. The community and I believe Ms. Noreen Copeland asked as well to have this conversation 2 years ago and again last year. So again, my question to you is, what are you going to do on May 9th when we've already on request asked for the things that East Tampa needed? And again, in November, as the commission, we asked also for you to come in and give us resources, but again, you're telling us that is not available. May 9th, we don't want to put any more resources to even getting the community out. Again, I would like the same energy that has happened for Hyde Park, that is happening for Port Tampa, to be the same for East Tampa. So maybe I'm not asking the correct questions. May 9th, can we have some things on the agenda to talk to the community about? Like, here are some important sites that are in East Tampa. Here are some questions that we've dealt with in other communities. The cemetery, this is where we are right now. We always have people come into East Tampa asking us what we want, and we keep telling them for years and years, but nothing ever happens. So for the HPC Commission, could you give us an agenda for May 9th? Because again, I don't want to keep wasting time. I don't want my children to come to these same meetings and nothing happen.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle for the legal department. Commissioner, if you want to have a specific motion to modify your motion, there was a previous, it's in the minutes what was discussed for the November 29th, 2022 meeting. If you would like to make a specific motion other than what was discussed at that meeting, you're more than welcome to do that. This will be the time to do that. If you want specific direction, it has to be in the form of a motion.
Okay, thank you for that point of clarity. I would like to make a motion that in preparation for the May 9th A and B committee with the CRA, I would like for the Historic Preservation Commission to bring to start the cultural resource inventory, to direct money to engage the community of East Tampa.
Yeah, go
Are
ahead.
we not allowed to do, please, I'm asking for a point of
Go ahead,
clarity.
go ahead. You can finish your motion.
Okay, you're shaking your head. Am I not doing the right thing? Since please tell me before
I have to
proceed.
clarify some of what you're saying, but, I mean, I'm not going to interrupt your motion.
Okay, so let's start over. I would like to make a motion that in preparation for May 9th, East Tampa meeting with A and B, that the Historic Preservation staff prepares information for the East Tampa so that an inventory of what is already historic can be shown to the community. Did I make that, is that a clear motion?
I understand what you're saying. I think where Mr. Fernandez is trying to explain to the commission is that he's having that initial meeting with the CRA to determine what that footprint is. He doesn't know it, and that's what he's explained to the commission. He's trying to meet with the stakeholders to get that information. He doesn't have it right now. That's what he's explaining.
I mean, I think, you know, we can certainly highlight some resources that we know exist. There's not an inventory of the area.
I see.
I don't have a budget to conduct an inventory of an area this size for this fiscal year. We plan fiscal year to fiscal year for our resources, and I'm not budgeted for an inventory of this size. I would have to, or any inventory beyond just basic update for some smaller areas.
But that is in our purview, if that is something that we would like.
If conducting a cultural resource inventory is for an area of this size is something that the commission wants to undertake, then I can certainly look at what grant opportunities are out there to conduct this. It would be very extensive. It would be quite costly to do something like that. It would be beyond what my staff has the capability to do. They're very extensive researches of the history of an area, the architectural inventory, the years that they were constructed, and they're usually done by cultural resource consultants. So we have some of those are dated, as Elaine said, in Port Tampa. There was one done in 2020 that a grant was obtained for. Some of those are a little stale, but you know, we can go out and update because we have the base information. And in an area of this size, if we're talking about the entire area of East Tampa, that's going to be you know, a large undertaking, and it's going to be quite costly. So I would have to plan for that in the budget and in grant cycles to be able to try to leverage the money that we would have in our budget to be able to get a grant to try to conduct that. You know, by going out to the community, we can hopefully maybe narrow this
Right.
down. You know, so we're not dealing with just the entire area. We have maybe particular areas that we want to focus in on, and then that would certainly help us to somewhat tailor a cultural resource survey.
Thank you for letting us know those options. Thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
So, thank you for sharing that, Dominique. And thank you, Dennis, for your hard work, because that is not an easy area. Because I remember you gave me the information on Memorial Park Cemetery, and just the one parcel is really difficult to get any like hedgeway on. So I called the, I think she's the manager of the cemeteries in Hillsborough County. And I was on the phone with her for like 2020, maybe 2021. And it's really difficult because that cemetery is tied up. Apparently the owners of it, the city doesn't own it. And so therefore the city can't go into it and do things legally because it's not their property. And so there's a lot of red tape. And then the records for the cemetery is not organized. It's not well put together. So, and I went to the site and I visited it and I visited that area. And so I wanted to make a comment that there's another cemetery. It's called Rose Cemetery, Whispering Souls Cemetery, and Zion Cemetery. And this is in Safety Harbor. And they literally had to form a grassroots group to actually get the cemetery preserved. So I think it's like the difference between Hyde Park and East Tampa is that I think homeowners, and they form associations, and then the city has something to work with, but it's really difficult when there's nothing there for the city to work with. It's kind of like Dennis is going out to do search and discovery. He has to find people that are interested that can therefore form an association or a neighborhood something, and then you have a point of contact and somebody to work with that's grassroots in the neighborhood. So that's what I'm assuming that you're doing with this meeting, is that you're going out, search and discovery to see what's there. And I understand that too, in Black communities, you don't want to come in, well, in general, because they're gonna be like, what are you doing? Are you trying to build a sewage plant here? So it's like you have to be wise and do your research, and then the people that are there, maybe get influential people, business owners, like long generational homeowners that have a stake in the community that would be willing to form a association that would assist with doing that on the ground, because it's a huge undertaking, and this kind of thing takes years. It doesn't happen right away. So that's what but I thank you for all your hard work, because it's not easy to do. Because I was trying to research that cemetery, and it was like I was getting nowhere with it. So thank you.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm thinking is, with your meeting with the CRA, you might suggest some properties that, maybe a multiple property designation would be a good place to start. Maybe throw out some ideas of these properties, and then obviously listen to what the community has to say as far as what's important to them. And that's really the starting point, you know, and I think that's where we are. We'll have the meeting, you'll have the meeting, you'll provide some information, you'll get some feedback and return to us with that information, and, you know, we'll accept your information and maybe suggest some other steps to take. But, I'm sorry to say this, but Rome wasn't built in a day. We want to recognize the resources, or at least I do, of East Tampa, but it's a huge area. It's really, really big, and I think the historic resources in this area are, my guess is that they're disconnected.
Yeah.
So that's part of the challenge.
As a lifetime Tampanian, as a business owner in East Tampa, as a CRA person, and dealing with boards like this, we see over and over again when areas are constantly neglected. East Tampa has the highest population of homeowners, generational business owners. And for that big area, as everyone keeps saying how big it is, no one has came in and said, you know what, let's put this in quadrants so that we can break down on how to fix this area. And I know that I'm just a regular person who volunteer my time here, but I can see that this is a big area, and everyone's telling me that. But what no one is saying is, okay, let's put steps in place on how to fix this, because this is one of the, if you don't know the history of Tampa, East Tampa is actually the heart of Tampa. Matter of fact, that cemetery is the original heart of Tampa. And for that area to be constantly neglected, it shows that we can keep piecemealing it. We can get little groups to do this and that, but other areas are growing. Water Street is growing, but East Tampa is continuously dying. But I hear everything that's said, and again, I'm solution-based. So however we can do to get this area back populated and historically preserved, I am all for it. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, there was a motion that was made. Are you amending your motion, withdrawing your motion?
Well, my motion was on the floor. There was no second, so I'm guessing it's.
Well, we didn't ask for a second.
Okay, where are we at?
So what is the motion?
Right, we need
The
to,
motion was to, in the May 9th meeting with the AMB and the CRA, to have resources available so that the neighborhood and community can engage. That is my motion.
What type of resources? Do you want to provide more specificity?
I don't have what the historic preservation does, but the same things that were done for Port Tampa, the gathering of information as I believe in the November hearing, when staff brought up the reports of Dr. White, those type of information of the historic presence of East Tampa, could those things be added to that meeting?
Are you saying, and I'm asking for clarification, just so that it's clear in the minutes. Are you asking for Mr. Fernandez to have this same historical presentation for his meeting at the CRA?
Though, that same type of information. Am I not?
So I can maybe kind of truncate I plan on that.
Okay.
I plan on having a presentation to present to the committee that's appropriate for the discussion that we're having. Obviously, it's going to be with existing information, existing resources that we have at hand, and properties that we have designated in the area to kind of highlight those. But also I give programmatic background about what is historic preservation and what it does and what it can accomplish in the community. So that's typically, a first exposure to preservation that I normally will put out to the public at a meeting.
Okay, so I would like to withdraw my motion under the point of clarity. Thank you.
Sure.
Dennis, you did say you have some buildings that you were gonna highlight, right?
Right, we have some buildings in the area that are already locally designated, and so we would kind of, usually when you highlight those, people go, oh, I know that building, or, so we want that type of engagement to see, what people can kind of recognize as being appropriate for historic preservation. Because there's different types of preservation. There's preservation of buildings, but there's, cultural preservation of sites as well. And so we would want to try to identify, the priorities of the community.
On that, I think we have, I would like to say, though, the minutes, apparently Ms. Cobb brought this up during the new business element of the November meeting, and there is a statement in there requesting that staff review the potential of designating East Tampa historic sites. And I believe that what we have heard today is the very beginning of those steps forward. So perhaps this is, it's a start. I know. It's difficult to say, oh, look, this didn't happen here and this didn't happen there, but you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And so I think once we get your report back in May, there will be some definitive clarity on what the community actually thinks is an appropriate methodology to pursue and what resources they can also provide to assist in that process. It's when I look at the other historic districts, the community has contributed enormous amounts of time and effort and volunteerism and in the research and documentation of things. So that may be what you will come to know when you talk to them in May.
Yeah, and obviously this is the first. I think we'll identify other opportunities. May not be within the CRA structure, but like a neighborhood organization, I work with the Ybor City Development Corporation quite a bit, and work with the CRAs and the Heights, and to try to provide a structure for these conversations. So it will be an initial step, but not the final step, certainly.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Is there any other, well, let's see, the next item is to acknowledge the date and time of our next HPC meeting, which will be on May 16th, 2023 at 9 a.m. in these same chambers. And is there any other new business that anyone would like to raise at this point in time? All right. Hearing that, then I will call this meeting adjourned at close to 11 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.